Before time had a name, before the stars lit the sky, there was nothing. No light, no dark, no breath. Just stillness. Pure, infinite stillness. And yet, within it, something began to ache. A pulse, a whisper, a longing that didn't know its name. From that ache came the first shimmer, the idea that something could exist. This is not history, nor science, but memory older than memory, etched in the soul. Close your eyes. Return with me to a time before time, to the whispers that dreamed the world awake. Chapter 1. The First Pulse. In the beginning, there was not chaos, nor darkness, only stillness. It was not the void of terror, but the quiet of something that has not yet decided whether to become. Imagine, if you will, the silence before a heartbeat, before breath, before even the desire to breathe. That was the first place. Not a place of space or matter, but of absolute pause. From this stillness, ancient minds envisioned what they called the first pulse. It was not sound, not light, not even motion. It was the idea of motion, a vibration that did not move, a breath that was not yet inhaled. Many cultures, across millennia, have tried to name this moment. The Sumerians, among the first to carve meaning into clay, spoke of Abzu, the sweet water beneath all things, a cosmic ocean that predated gods. They believed it was Abzu who first stirred, rising with Tiamat, the salt sea of chaos. Not as lovers, but as opposites longing to merge. Their union, so myth says, sparked the creation of gods, skies, and destinies, not through war, but through tension. In the Egyptian temples, priests whispered of Nun, the boundless waters of the deep. From Nun emerged Atum, the self-begotten god, one who, standing on the first mound of being, spoke creation into rhythm, not with weapons, but with words. And in the secret teachings of Hebrew mysticism, we find the concept of Ein Sof, the infinite, a divine so vast, so unknowable, that it had to withdraw itself, to make space for creation. They call this act Simtsum, a cosmic shrinking, a divine retreat to allow the world to begin. These are not religions as we know them today. These were fragments of awe, etched into the bones of civilization. Not truth, not fiction, but perhaps a kind of memory, not remembered with the mind, but with the soul, a whisper beneath the logic of language. Gentle reminder to you, the dreamer. What you are hearing is a tapestry of stories, threads of myth, wonder, and ancient questionings. They are not scientific fact, nor sacred decree. They are echoes from humanity's longing to explain the moment before all things. And in this sacred longing, we might find something truer than truth. Chapter 2. The Veil of Waters. In the beginning, there was no ground to stand upon, no sky to look toward, no breath to inhale. There was only the water. Not oceans as we know them, not rivers flowing through valleys, but something deeper, more ancient than any sea ever spoken into myth. The ancients called it by many names. The Hindus spoke of the cosmic ocean, an infinite sea where Narayana, the Eternal One, slept upon the coils of the serpent Ananta, his breath rising and falling like the rhythm of unborn worlds. Before time counted itself, before even the gods dared to dream, Narayana's dream birthed all creation, a lotus emerging from the navel of silence. In the myths of Mesopotamia, there was no land at first, only the mingling of Abzu, the freshwater deep, and Tiamat, the salt sea of chaos. Their union, imperfect and uneasy, was not love, but necessity. Together, they swirled in a formless dance, spawning the first gods, who would later rebel, shattering the waters that birthed them. From Tiamat's body, they carved the heavens and the earth. From her weeping eyes, rivers flowed. From her sighing breath, storms were born. This was not birth with joy. This was creation through conflict, as if the universe could only be formed when stillness was violated. Further east, the ancient Chinese whispered of Hundun, the undifferentiated chaos. Before yin and yang, before heaven and earth, before even Tao had a name, it was said that everything floated within a cosmic soup, a boundless fog where nothing yet knew itself. Only when the cosmic egg cracked, dividing light from shadow, did Pangu rise, the first being to breathe and to push apart sky and earth with the stretch of his limbs. Yet even then, what lay beneath the world was still the water. To the Maya, the world was born not once, but many times. Each creation cycle rose from the primordial sea, and each was washed away again in a flood of failure. They told of gods trying again and again, sculpting men from mud, then wood, then finally maize, the sacred corn that made humans worthy. But always, the sea watched, waiting, as if it knew that all stories, no matter how divine, return to water in the end. Even in far icy lands, the Norse spoke of the Ginnungagap, a great yawning void, bordered by fire and ice. Where the two touched, the ice melted into droplets, and from that, the first being, Ymir, emerged. His sweat birthed giants. And so the ancients saw water not as mere element, but as veil, a shimmering curtain between realms. Behind it lay the first memories, the first hunger, the first gods. To pass through water was to die and be reborn. To drink of it was to forget, then remember. And to listen to it was to hear the echo of the first pulse, still rippling beneath all things. Gentle reminder, what you are hearing is not history nor prophecy, but the stitched together hush of forgotten tongues telling us where we came from or where we dreamed we did. Let it wash over you. Let it carry you further into the deep. Before there was this or that, before we spoke of right or wrong, there was only one. Unified, whole, undivided. But perfection, it seems, is a fragile thing. Even silence can crack. The ancients tell of a moment when the one became two. In Zoroastrian lore, it was the split of Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, light and shadow, wisdom and deceit. The eternal twins locked in battle before creation even took shape. In that severance, the first contrast was born. Not merely of light and dark, but of choice. A universe with only unity has no conflict, no growth, no story. But when one becomes two, a tension hums beneath all things. The tension that births time, and pain, and wonder. In Hebrew myth, it was the fall of Lucifer, the bearer of light. He did not fall from evil, he fell from pride, from the spark of wanting to be more than light, to carry his own fire. Cast from heaven, he plummeted into shadow, yet even there, his light never fully died. And so the world gained contrast, a morning star that still glows faintly in the dark. The Greeks told of Prometheus, the titan who defied the gods to gift fire to humankind. Not just warmth, but thought, the ability to question, to shape, to disobey. For this, he was punished, chained to a rock, his liver devoured daily by an eagle, regenerating each night. The message was clear. Bringing light has a price. But still, we lit our torches, and we remembered him. In Gnostic texts, they whisper of Sophia, wisdom incarnate, who gave birth to a creation out of longing without her counterpart, causing a ripple of imperfection across the aeons. That ripple became the material world, not evil, but fractured, distant from source, a realm where contrast is law, where light must be kindled again and again. Even science echoes this. From a singularity came expansion, from stillness, motion, from uniformity, entropy. Contrast is not the fall, it is the beginning of story. What are we but creatures forged in paradox? We seek peace, yet we stir the storm. We crave belonging, yet we wander. We long for truth, yet we wrap ourselves in beautiful lies. And still, we reach for light, knowing it casts shadows behind us. So the ancients understood, contrast is not punishment, it is invitation. To grow, to choose, to remember. That we are made not only of dust and stars, but of longing between them. Gentle reminder, this is not dogma nor doctrine, only the hush between belief and imagination. Let it lull you. Let it open your dreaming eye. The world is not one thing, it never was, but in the tension between opposites, a heartbeat continues. Soft, steady, sacred.
Chapter 4, The War Without Names. Before the names, before the borders, before the gods even had faces, there was war. Not the kind of war written in scrolls or sung in ancient epics. No, this was a war older than memory, a war not for land or gold, but for meaning. The earliest mythologies whisper of battles waged before mankind's first breath. In the Enuma Elish, Mesopotamia's creation epic, the primordial goddess Tiamat, mother of all, rises in fury to destroy her children, angered by their rebellion. The god Marduk stands against her, splitting her body to form the heavens and earth. Creation was not a gift, it was a conquest. In Hindu cosmology, they speak of devas and asuras, gods and anti-gods locked in endless cycles of conflict across vast yugas, ages that span hundreds of thousands of years. These weren't battles of good versus evil, but of balance struggling to breathe. Sometimes the gods win, sometimes the asuras rise, but the war never ends. In Gnostic and apocryphal Christian texts, there is talk of a cosmic rebellion. Angels who question the divine order, led by the radiant morning star, cast down not in hatred, but in sorrow. And on earth, they passed on forbidden knowledge, alchemy, astrology, steel. These watchers, they loved us. They fell for us, and for that, they were damned. Not all wars leave skeletons behind. Some leave echoes in dreams, in buried symbols, in the ache of remembering something you were never taught. Legends from pre-Incan South America speak of sky people who came on chariots of fire, splintered the earth with storms, and vanished into the clouds. Aboriginal Australians sing of the dream time, when ancestors warred in the sky and carved the lands below with their struggles. From the Dogon of Mali to the myths of ancient Japan, from Norse Ragnarok to Aztec Tezcatlipoca, the stories shift, but the pattern holds. A war waged before us, and perhaps within us still. And so the ancients believed. The blood of those first wars runs in our veins. When we rage, when we build, when we destroy, we echo a conflict without end. What century did this war take place? No scroll says, no date remains. But its ruins are buried in our myths, our fears, our bones. Perhaps it began in the pre-Diluvian era, before the great flood stories of Mesopotamia, or even before time was counted. Perhaps it never ended. Some esoteric scholars argue that the Great Pyramids, the ziggurats of Ur, the Cyclopean walls of Peru, were not just monuments to gods, but scars of a long-forgotten war. A war of knowledge versus control, of remembrance versus erasure. So what is war, if not a fever that dreams repeat? We fight not for territory, but to prove our truths, to carve order out of chaos, to insist we are not forgotten, to be gods or monsters. As you lie in your bed tonight, know that the silence around you was once a battlefield, that the stars above were once bloodstains in a myth, that somewhere in the marrow of your bones still hums the memory of a war that had no name. Gentle reminder, this story is not a scripture. It is a whisper. Let it guide you gently into sleep. You do not need to believe it, only feel it. Let the war fade, let peace arrive, and dream as if the world had never known conflict. The Hollow Crown.
They said the gods gave us kings, not because we deserved them, but because we feared the alternative. Before thrones, before crowns, before names etched into stone, there were whispers that man must not be left to rule himself. In the shadow of the first wars, as the echoes of celestial battles faded into dream, a new need rose. Order. From the ruins of chaos, humans began to build. Not only cities or temples, but hierarchy. Someone had to lead. Someone had to command. But who? The ancient Sumerians tell of kingship descending from the heavens, not earned but bestowed. In the Sumerian king list, the earliest rulers lived for thousands of years. Alulim of Eridu ruled for 28,800 years. No man lives that long. No man ever did. These were not men, they were symbols, masks. The Egyptians crowned their pharaohs not as kings but as gods, living Horus in the flesh. To challenge the pharaoh was to challenge the heavens. To obey him was to survive the afterlife. Was it devotion or fear? In China's early Zhou dynasty, rulers justified power with the mandate of heaven. Heaven chose them, they said. And when crops failed or floods came, heaven revoked its favor. Rebellions weren't crimes, they were corrections. Even divine right came with expiration dates. So what is a crown, really? A band of metal, shaped like fire, set upon the brow of a mortal, to make him seem immortal. It shines, but it is hollow. Some say the first crowns were made not of gold, but of bones or branches, worn by shamans, not sovereigns. These were not rulers, but interpreters, mouthpieces for spirits, intercessors for sky and soil. Over time, power changed hands. The whisper became a command. The seer became a king. And the crown forgot what it once meant. In the myths of the Dogon, the rulers of the past received knowledge from beings of the stars. In Incan legends, the sun god sent his children to establish cities and laws. But always, power came from above. We never chose it. We received it. Or perhaps it was imposed. Even the Bible speaks of reluctant rule. In 1 Samuel 8, the people begged the prophet for a king. God warns them, "He will take your sons and daughters, your fields and vineyards, your freedom." But still, they insisted. They would rather serve than wander. And so we come to now. The crowns are lighter, the robes thinner, but the thrones still stand. We trade rulers, change flags, hold elections. The sleeping seed. In the aftermath of the war without form, nothing moved. Not the stars, not the sound, not even time. It was as if the universe itself had held its breath, and within that breath, something was planted. It was not light, not yet. It was possibility. A single seed, unseen, unfelt, unheard, resting deep in the folds of silence. It did not grow, it did not dream, it simply waited. Some call it the soul of the cosmos, others the ember of memory, a faint echo of all that was lost before there was anything to lose. This seed did not fall from the heavens. It was the heavens in their purest form, unawakened, undecided, unshaped. The potential for everything, the presence of nothing. For eons it lay untouched. A hush settled over the void, thicker than darkness, heavier than time. This was not sleep, this was stillness. A sacred pause, a moment outside moments. And yet, even stillness trembles. Somewhere in the deep, beneath the skin of reality, a faint vibration began. Not a sound, but something before sound. Not a movement, but something before motion. A whisper before the first word. The seed stirred, not with hunger nor with desire, but with memory. It remembered, being remembered. It recalled a warmth that had never touched it, and yet it knew. It recalled a name that had never been spoken, and yet it answered. It recalled light, though it had never seen. It remembered what it could become. But becoming is not born of urgency. The seed did not rush. It did not force itself open. Instead, it listened to the silence, to the ancient absence, to the lullabies sung by nothingness. And in that listening, the seed grew wise. It began to understand that not all light is fire, not all awakening is sudden, and not all birth comes with pain. Some beginnings are slow enough to shape eternity. Still, the cosmos watched, not as a god, not as a judge, but as a mirror, reflecting the seed's sleep in every galaxy not yet spun, in every atom not yet born. And from this reflection, the idea of time first took root. Time did not tick, it pulsed, in rhythm with the sleeping seed. This was the first rhythm, the pulse of all things yet to be, the heartbeat of a dream not yet dreamed. And in this rhythm, hidden from all but the forgotten, the seed waited still, not afraid, not impatient, only sure that one day light would remember itself, and the seed would wake. When light remembered itself, there was no spark, no thunder, no divine cry from the heavens. The change came quietly, so quietly even silence held its breath. It began not with light but with a question that did not have words, only weight, a trembling in the fabric of the void. Am I? And in asking that question, light remembered itself. Not as a flame, not as a star, but as awareness. A soft unfolding like the first petal of a flower no one planted. It was not sudden. It did not burst into existence. It unfurled, delicate, unsure, like morning stretching across a sleeping sea. This was not illumination. This was recognition. The seed that had slumbered in the hollow of the cosmos began to glow from within, not with heat but with remembrance. It did not remember who it was, but that it was. It did not know its purpose, but it sensed there was one. In that moment, the cosmos shifted, not with force, but with permission. The void did not resist. It welcomed the remembering, as if it too had waited eons for this return. Not of light itself, but of something that knew how to be light. The remembering spread like ink in water, like music that hadn't been written but always existed. And from this remembering, the first truth formed. I am. It echoed not through space but through being. Everything that had once been still now shivered, not in fear but in recognition. Atoms not yet born trembled with anticipation. The darkness did not flee. It listened, and for the first time, it felt known. Light, now aware, looked upon the void not as its enemy, but as its cradle. It did not seek to destroy the dark. It loved it, for it had been the cocoon of its becoming. There was no war, no conquest, only reunion, only homecoming. And from this harmony came the first motion, a gentle ripple, then a wave, then the swelling tide of becoming. Galaxies did not explode into being. They were sung into existence by the vibration of memory. Planets did not collide. They danced, drawn to the rhythm of the remembering. Time began not as measurement but as music. Light moved not in straight lines but in spirals of wonder. And from this spiraled light came the idea of shape, of story, of self. The cosmos did not erupt. It awakened, and in that awakening, the forgotten watched. Not from above, not from beyond, but from within. They had always been there, hidden in the breath of beginnings, waiting for light to remember so they could remember too. And so began the age of memory, where light was not just seen but understood, where the great forgetting. Before time moved forward, before stories were told, before the first name was ever spoken, there was memory. The memory of being, of light remembering itself, of silence echoing with truth. But something stirred beneath the remembering. A quiet ripple, a soft decision, a sacrifice. The seed that had awakened would now sleep again, but not in darkness, this time in form. The light chose to forget, not out of fear, not by force, but by longing. To know itself not as a whisper, but as 1,000 voices. To feel itself not as one breath, but as 1,000,000,000 heartbeats. To become many, and in becoming, to begin the great experiment of remembering again from within the dream. This was the first descent. Not a fall, but a surrender. Light folded itself into matter. Memory wrapped itself in skin. Spirit sank into story. The infinite became finite, so it could learn what it meant to be infinite again. This was not exile. It was exploration. But in order to fully become, the light had to forget. To truly forget. It had to release its knowing, like a breath held too long. The stars that once sang grew silent. The seeds of awareness drifted like dust into newborn worlds. And so, the beings who once remembered the stars built temples to find them again. They forgot they were the fire. They forgot they were the wind. They forgot the voice was their own. This was the great forgetting. A mercy, a mystery, a mirror. For how can one find what one never lost? How can one awaken without first dreaming? The forgotten ones watched. They too descended, not as gods, but as shadows, as symbols, as stories told in sleep. They whispered from cave walls, from trembling leaves, from the silence between thunder. They were not gone. They were woven into myth, into legend, into lullabies. They became the questions we could never stop asking, the pull in our chests when we stare at the stars too long. And yet, even in forgetting, something remembered. A flicker in the child's eyes, a dream too vivid to be fantasy, a melody no one taught us, and yet we hum it still. Even now, the seed glows faintly within all things, waiting, listening, hoping. Not for rescue, but for recognition. You who listen, you who wonder, you are not broken, you are not lost. You are part of the story. The breath in the dust. Before the name, before the fire, before the first cry tore through silence, there was the dust. Endless, weightless, waiting. And in that dust there stirred a longing, not of earth but of memory. The echo of the light that had once remembered itself now sought form. Not in the stars, not in the heavens, but in the clay beneath. It began with a breath. Not wind nor voice, but intention. A will older than galaxies exhaled into silence, and the dust responded. It rose, slowly, like mist made of soil, shaping itself with trembling reverence. The breath, the divine inhale, entered it. And with that breath, the dust awoke. It did not speak, it did not know speech, but it moved. It felt, and in its hollow chest echoed something new, yearning. Thus the first vessel was formed, not as a man, not as a woman, but as a question. The breath in the dust asked, "What am I?" Adam, the first container. He was not the first being, but he was the first to carry weight, not of muscle or gravity, but of meaning. Adam, from the soil, Adama, a container shaped in stillness, born not of chaos, but of design. The divine looked upon him not with pride, but with silence, For in Adam there was the spark, not yet flame, but the kindling of awareness. In Eden he walked not as king, but as witness. Every leaf spoke to him, every river remembered him, but he did not yet remember himself. He named things. That was his first magic. Lion, tree, star. Each name he gave shaped the world, and in doing so shaped him. Yet with each name something slipped, for to define is to separate, and in naming Adam began to forget. He became the container, beautiful, empty, necessary. Lilith, the one who would not kneel before Eve, there was Lilith, formed not from Adam but from the same dust, equal, whole, untamed. She was not made to be silent, she was not made to follow. She remembered too much of the light, too much of the breath before the breath, and so she would not kneel. The divine grew silent. Adam grew afraid. Lilith left Eden not in rage but in refusal. She walked into the darkness, and the darkness embraced her. There she became legend, demon, mother of monsters. But those were the names of the afraid. To some she is curse, to others she is memory, of a time when clay did not bow, when form did not mean obedience. She did not forget.
Enkidu, clay made wild far from Eden, in the lands of Uruk. The gods again pressed fingers into clay. But this time, they shaped not a container, but a mirror to man's pride. Enkidu, the wild one, hair like the steppes, voice like thunder wrapped in innocence. He ran with the beasts. He drank from rivers. He did not name. He did not claim. He simply was. Yet the city called him, not with voice, but with lure. They sent Shamat, woman, wisdom, warmth. She taught him language. She taught him longing. And with each lesson, Enkidu fell into knowing, into pain, into mortality. He became man, and in doing so, lost his wild. But in his death, Gilgamesh wept, and in that weeping something eternal stirred, the realization that clay could love. The ones before names. They speak of those who came before Adam, before time. Nephilim, Anunnaki, Watchers, names we place upon shadows because we fear the shape beneath. They were tall and they were strange. Some say they fell from stars. Others say they rose from the deep. They taught writing, fire, war, worship. Were they angels, aliens, ancestors, or only reflections of our own forgotten selves? What matters is not what they were, but what they became. Echoes, warnings, questions carved into cave walls and dreams. They remind us, not all clay was shaped with mercy. Some thrones were forged in terror, dust that dared to dream. There came a moment when clay looked at the sky and asked, "What if?" It dreamed. And dreaming, it painted gods. It sang stars into being. It wrote myths with blood and fire. The dream was not always gentle. It birthed kingdoms and tyrants, temples and wars. But always, it remembered the question, what am I? In dreaming, man tried to answer. He built pyramids and pantheons. He carved laws into stone. But behind every creation stood the same dust daring to rise. And the breath, though silent, watched. The war of will's clay was never passive. Some thrones rejected the divine. Others demanded it bow. Across time, stories clashed. Adam versus Lilith.
priest versus prophet, will versus destiny. The war was not of swords, but of silence, of memory, of who remembered more and who dared to forget. Every myth, every scripture is a battle cry. This is truth, that is lie. But beneath them all, the breath remains, still, waiting, watching. Perhaps the war is not between gods and men, but between who we were and who we pretend to be. Thrones of clay. And so we sat, upon marble, upon blood, upon sand. We crowned ourselves kings of memory, emperors of forgetting. But the breath has not left us. It hums in the pulse. It flickers in the dream. It waits in the dust. We build towers, forget origins, rewrite stars. But clay remembers. It remembers Lilith's defiance, Enkidu's tears, Adam's silence. And in quiet moments, between heartbeat and breath, it whispers, "You were never just dust. You were longing made form."
The Age of Thrones, when clay claimed crowns. The age of clay had passed. No longer content with simply being, humanity began to shape not only its tools, but its destiny. From the fertile crescent of Sumer to the delta of the Nile, the world watched as men claimed what was once left to gods, the right to rule. The first cities rose like questions etched in mud brick. Uruk, Eridu, Lagash. They were more than settlements, they were symbols. For the first time, walls enclosed identity and power took shape not as myth, but as man. The kings of these cities did not ask for permission from the stars. They did not kneel before thunder. They placed crowns upon their own brows. And the thrones they built were not forged in fire, but in will, harder than stone, more enduring than myth. The breath still lingered in the dust, but now it whispered in corridors of politics and law. A new language was forming, not of prayers, but of commands. This was the age when clay claimed crowns and forgot it had ever been dust, the blood that drew boundaries. It began with lines, drawn in sand, etched in stone, boundaries, borders, a claim to what was never truly owned. With walls came walls of men, spears in hand, fear in eyes. Wars no longer for survival, but for dominance. The kings who once shepherded people now sent them to die, for honor, for land, for gods whose silence had become strategy. In Sumer, rival cities turned rivers red. In the valleys of the Nile, dynasties clashed over legacy, not necessity. And as blood marked the earth, maps began to form, not of geography, but of ambition. The ground did not change, but the stories did, and those stories bled. The god kings. To rule was not enough, so men became more, or pretended to. Pharaohs of Egypt claimed divine blood, their names written alongside Ra and Osiris, their voices echoed in the tombs of eternity. In Akkad, kings took omens from entrails and thunder, wrapping themselves in prophecy like armor. They no longer needed approval from the divine because they had become divine. Gods no longer spoke from mountains, they wore crowns, sat on gold, demanded obedience not as messengers, but as originators of fate. The divine was institutionalized, codified, weaponized. And the people, they prayed upward, not outward. The stars remained silent.
Scrolls of fire. They say the first word burned. On clay tablets baked beneath the sun, scribes etched memory into permanence, cuneiform, hieroglyph, the alphabet of power. What was once passed through song became sealed in stone. The age of stories became the age of record, but these scrolls were not only memory, they were mechanisms, to count grain, to levy tax, to bind law, to control. He who held the scroll held the truth, and so truth was molded, curated, amended. In in Babylon, in Thebes, the pen became a scepter. The gods wrote the stars, but men wrote the laws. The twin temples. Every city had two hearts, the palace and the temple, the king and the priest. One ruled the body, the other the soul, but the line blurred. In Babylon, the ziggurat touched heaven, but its base controlled wheat. In Egypt, priests embalmed kings, but also dictated which crops to plant. Who truly ruled? The divine was now a ledger, a ritual, a calendar of control. Festivals became policy, sacrifice became politics. In the shadow of incense and chant, gold changed hands, heaven was near. But so was the treasury, the punishment of stone. Justice once came from thunder, now it came from tablets. Hammurabi, king of Babylon, carved the first laws not into memory, but into basalt, black stone etched with divine decree. An eye for an eye, it said, not out of cruelty, but order. The gods had been chaotic. Men, in contrast, sought balance, but balance through fear, through permanence, through the threat of being remembered as wrong. The laws did not always protect the weak, but they bound the strong. In their shadow, civilization grew, stone punished and stone preserved. Voices beneath the sand. Not all whispers come from the sky. Beneath the dunes, beneath the ruins, beneath the tombs, voices linger. A pharaoh's sigh sealed in a golden mask, a servant's grief etched in a grave offering, the whisper of a high priest muttered into canopic jars. Archaeology calls them relics, but they are memories, not just of rituals, but of longing. Even in death, the ancient world spoke. Their words were not always understood, but they were felt. In the chill of a tomb, in the crack of a seal, in the dust that clung to bone, the dead are not gone, they are only quiet. The crown and the silence. By the time crowns outnumbered myths, silence became sacred. The gods, once loud and close, now receded. Or perhaps they were pushed. Kings ruled, priests interpreted, laws dictated, but something had faded. The breath that once formed dust into longing now watched from afar. The Age of Thrones was magnificent, terrifying, structured, but in its heart, a silence had taken root, not of absence, but of choice. For in choosing order, humanity had quieted the chaos, and in doing so, muffled the divine. But the breath still lingers. The hollow crown. Ashes of empire. They rose like dawns, the empires of old. With stone and sword, decree and dream, they carved their names into the flesh of the world. Babylon, Hatti, Mycenae, each a song of power sung across centuries. But the end did not come with war cries. It came like rot, slow, quiet, from within. Trade routes dried like dying rivers. Crops failed under skies that offered no answer. Kings grew fat on forgetting. And the people, tired of oaths that meant hunger, simply walked away. In the dust that followed, scribes wrote not of glories but of absences. Where did they go? One tablet asks. Another, the gods have closed their eyes. What survives is not the crown, but the ash, the silence of the gods. There was a time when every sunrise was a sermon. Gods were not metaphors. They were neighbors. They drank the wine of sacrifice. They spoke in storms and plagues. Their statues bled. Their temples breathed. But silence crept in. Offerings were made, but no omens came. Priests wept at altars of mute stone. Oracles choked on dry air. The divine withdrew, or perhaps the world grew too loud to hear them. Some say the gods never left. They only refused to answer. And in that silence, kings grew louder. The library that burned. Once the world was written in ink and breath. The Library of Alexandria was not walls of scrolls, but a cathedral of memory. There, the thoughts of millennia slept on shelves. And then they burned. Not once, but many times. By accident, by fear, by pride. Flames devoured languages no longer spoken, truths never duplicated. They say a man once cried, holding a scroll as it turned to ash, whispering, "We have killed our ancestors." For to forget is a kind of murder. The Forgotten Kings. There are names carved into stone, no tongue remembers how to speak. Once these names commanded oceans and eclipsed the sun. Now they are weathered scratches beneath sand and vine. A king once demanded his tomb be so grand the stars would bow. Today, tourists take selfies atop his dust. Power, once absolute, is now anecdote. The crown that shone now lies beneath centuries of forgetting, the clay beneath thrones.
We built high. We crowned ourselves with divinity. But beneath every palace lies the same dust. It is patient. It waits for marble to crack, for bronze to tarnish, for pride to forget humility. It remembers every footstep, every stone stacked in arrogance. The clay beneath thrones is not dead. It dreams. It listens. And when the throne falls, it welcomes its children home. Echoes in the bones. Dig deep enough, and the bones speak. Not in words, but in arrangement, in care, in ritual. Here, a woman buried with tools. There, a child with toys. A man with scars on his ribs but coins in his mouth. Love, war, hope, grief. All left fingerprints. They do not tell us who was king, but they whisper who mattered. When time looked back, there comes a moment when a civilization stares into its own past and sees not glory, but warning. Ruins do not lie. They tell us what happens when we forget we are dust. Every collapsed column, every buried city is a sermon in stone, and still, we build. But perhaps, somewhere, we begin to remember. Not just what was lost, but what it meant. The hollow crown. It glitters, but it is empty. The crown passed down through hands stained with conquest now rests on no head. It sits in museums, in stories, in fantasies. We chased it for centuries, only to find it was never made for the soul. Kings are gone. Thrones are hollow. But the breath remains, still pulsing, still whispering. You were never meant to rule. You were meant to remember. If these whispers have stirred something in you, consider subscribing and joining us on the next part of the journey. You might drift to sleep along the way, but we'll still be here, telling the stories the world forgot.